Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most complex, high-stakes, balancing acts in modern geopolitics. We are unpacking the recent Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, between the United States and Iran. Now, what's absolutely fascinating here is the massive, almost unbelievable gap between the official messaging coming out of Tehran's leadership and the incredibly harsh reality on the ground. I mean, it is literally a masterclass in political spin, and we're going to untangle exactly how and why they are managing this wild tightrope walk.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. Listen to this quote. Mahmoud Baghar Kalibaf, the Speaker of Iran's parliament and a really central figure in these negotiations, just called this deal a long step towards final victory. I mean, wow. That tells you everything you need to know about how Iran's leadership is trying to frame this emerging MOU. They are absolutely not presenting it as a compromise or a necessary retreat. They're projecting this total illusion of control, spinning it as this huge triumph of resistance. And that's especially notable, because Kalibaf represents the more powerful, hardline factions within the state, including the Revolutionary Guards.
So, to untangle this whole geopolitical puzzle, we've broken this explainer down into 5 quick steps. First up, selling a victory. Second, the hardline pushback. Third, the economic necessity. Fourth, the risks and wildcards. And finally, the public's actual verdict.
All right, part 1, selling a victory. Let's look at how they're framing this narrative.
So, President Masoud Pezeshkian and the leadership are out there pitching this idea of a quote-unquote different world. And here's how they're actually constructing this win. Basically, they define victory by what their adversaries failed to do. They're claiming the US and Israel failed to force a surrender, failed to remove the regime, and failed to break their links to Hezbollah. Instead, Iran is pointing out, hey, we're still at the negotiating table. We're actively talking about sanctions relief, and we even managed to include Lebanon in the diplomatic framework. To the leadership right now, survival is the victory.
Moving on to part 2, the hardline pushback and the fractures happening inside Iran. But man, that polished victory story, it is getting serious pushback at home. We go from bragging about final victory to furious accusations of a draft deal that would turn Iran into an American colony. This scathing quote comes from a hardline member of parliament who literally serves as the deputy chair of the National Security Committee. So this isn't just random noise from the fringes of Iranian politics. This is a heavy accusation of appeasement coming directly from within one of the core institutions designed to oversee national security.
So the crucial point here is that these internal critics have very specific, deeply rooted worries. They're arguing that the negotiators flat out ignored the Supreme Leader's strict directive to not reopen the Strait of Hormuz to shipping. On top of that, they point right back to very recent history. Hardliners are reminding everyone that the previous Trump administration used diplomatic talks as a smokescreen while the US and Israel actively geared up for military action. Because of that massive historical distrust, they argue that any deal with Washington right now carries a huge risk of looking like weak appeasement.
But here's the really interesting thing. Lately, despite this vocal backlash, some of those loud, hardline voices have gotten noticeably quieter. And that shift? It suggests something huge. The decision to push forward with this deal was almost certainly authorized at the absolute highest levels of the Iranian state. Now, it doesn't mean they're totally unified, not by a long shot, but it strongly implies that the center of power has done the math and calculated that the devastating cost of rejecting a deal right now is just far, far greater than the political headache of absorbing some anger from their own hardliners.
Okay, part 3, the economic necessity. Time for a reality check. Let's step back from all the political spin for a second. Because make no mistake, while Iran's leadership is out there boasting about military leverage and regional pressure campaigns, it was pure, undeniable economic pressure that ultimately forced Tehran's hand and drove this memorandum. Just look at the sheer crush of reality here. You've got a country still reeling from a damaging recent war. They are getting hammered by severe, compounding sanctions and massive shipping restrictions. That's drastically choked off their access to global oil markets, which of course leads to a critical shortage of hard currency. And the downstream effect of all that, insanely high inflation that is relentlessly squeezing ordinary Iranians every single day. For the average family living through this, grand political speeches just don't matter as much as wanting lower grocery prices and an end to the constant, exhausting fear of another war. And it's absolutely fascinating to watch how both sides are using the exact same potential pile of unfrozen cash to sell this deal to their own people. On the U.S. side, Vice President J.D. Vance is emphasizing that, hey, absolutely zero U.S. taxpayer money is involved, but he notes Iran could get access to billions of its own dollars if and only if it meets strict commitments. Meanwhile, over in Tehran, they are messaging that exact same influx of cash not as bending the knee to America, but rather as a hard-won path to internal investment and national reconstruction.
Which brings us to part 4, risks and wildcards. Basically, why this future is so fragile. And this brilliantly illustrates just how tough unlocking that economic relief is going to be. I mean, the details of this MOU aren't even fully public yet. As negotiators head to Switzerland, they are staring down some massive unresolved roadblocks. On the nuclear front, they still have to hammer out the future of Iran's enriched uranium and lock down permitted enrichment levels. Geopolitically, they have to resolve the Strait of Hormuz and the incredibly messy situation in Lebanon. And economically, they have to agree on an exact timeline for sanctions relief and build concrete verification mechanisms. Literally, any single one of these issues could completely derail the whole process.
Then, you add in a whole other layer of geopolitical friction. Take the dynamic between Washington and Israel right now. You've got Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flatly stating that Israeli forces are going to remain in Lebanon for as long as necessary, completely rejecting reports of a withdrawal. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has actually publicly criticized Israelis' conduct in a recent strike in Beirut, while in the same breath insisting his relationship with Netanyahu is still excellent. This visible friction is super useful for Tehran's domestic propaganda, sure, but it undeniably makes the actual diplomatic agreement incredibly, incredibly fragile.
Because look, here is the ultimate stress test for this whole shebang. If Washington can't restrain Israel in Lebanon, and military operations there just keep going, Tehran's triumphant claim that Lebanon is safely covered by this deal, that gets tested immediately. If that happens, Iran is going to face immense, mounting internal pressure to respond militarily, and that would jeopardize, and likely collapse, this entire diplomatic effort in a heartbeat.
Finally, let's wrap up with part 5, the public's verdict. Slogans versus survival.
So, what do everyday citizens actually think? Well, looking at feedback from the BBC Persian audience, that official victory spin, it's definitely landing pretty unevenly. Check out this view from an anti-regime Iranian. They said, "Our hope was that the ruling system would change, but apart from misery, inflation, what benefit did it have for people?" This hits the nail on the head for a whole segment of the population that saw the recent crisis as a missed chance for real regime change. For them, a deal that just locks in the status quo is insanely frustrating.
But then go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. You have this reaction from a sympathetic audience member. The war showed sanctions are lifted not through begging, but through the use of power. So it's pretty clear that the government's official messaging, framing this MOU as a hard-fought victory born of strength, is actually working for certain loyal parts of their base.
Honestly, though, the most common feeling seems to land somewhere right in the middle, like this incredibly pragmatic take from another citizen. "I think it is temporary, but we needed a few months of breathing space and calm." For so many Iranians, this deal isn't about some grand ideological victory on the world stage. It is about simple, necessary survival. It's about getting back to work, living with a little less anxiety, and literally just getting a desperately needed second to breathe.
Let's pull this all together, because this single idea perfectly captures the reality of the situation. The Islamic Republic is selling the deal as victory because it cannot easily sell it as necessity. It's a really delicate, calculated spin to project strength to the outside world, all to mask the severe economic vulnerabilities that forced them to the table in the first place.
Which leaves us with one incredibly crucial question. Will the war actually stop? And will prices finally ease up for the Iranian people? Or is this just a temporary breather before the next massive escalation? At the end of the day, for millions of Iranians, the success of this deal won't be measured by slogans shouted in parliament. It's going to be measured by reality. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope breaking this down brought some clarity to such a wild and complex topic. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.